So now we've come to the time of the panel discussion. Trust, Technology and Tomorrow, Africa's Future, and reimagining Africa's future. And basically, we're going to be exploring themes around these topic areas with our esteemed panelists. We do have, to my left, we have Thongwane Namane, as I introduced her earlier. She's the CEO at SCS Aerospace, which is in the realm of space. Perhaps she'll tell us a bit more about what she does. And we have Daniel Silke. He is a political economist and business futurist. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Andrew Musangi. He's the chairperson of the Kenyan Central Bank. Thank you very much, all of you, for participating in this panel discussion. We have a number of questions lined up for you that we hope can resonate with the areas that are of strength for you. Daniel, I'm going to start with you. Because I think it's good for us to just sort of look at the sort of global geopolitical backdrop and so on. There's a lot going on in the world right now. People are saying it's more urgent now than ever for the African continent to get its act together so that it's not, reliant on exogenous forces, and therefore it's then not exposed to what they call external shocks. Every time something happens, we're not exposed to those shocks. And if we are, we mitigate the shocks by building resilience and so on and so forth. I just wanted your views around that, just as we start.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me on the panel. It's a pleasure to be with you. Yeah, look, I think, I've been involved in the political analysis game from a global level, all my life. I don't think I've ever experienced an era, I think, other than the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall, which ushered in a degree of hope for the expansion of liberal democracy and for free trade, a globalizing world, the world is flat. All of those issues have really done something of either suspension or reverse turn now in the course of the last year or two or three. And the extreme nature of this reversal from that period of hope is obviously a very challenging time, not just for us on this continent, but certainly I think for many other people everywhere across the planet. So, we are not of concern alone, is all I can say. Everyone is being buffeted by various themes, forces, shifting values, tensions, and in particular political polarization. That's been the order of the day, particularly in Western societies, but you could argue that many democracies that have been attempting to establish themselves, even on our continent, have become more and more polarized. Leadership dissatisfaction, a more restless youth in particular, have had a profound effect, I think, here on this continent as well. So the broader operational environment is extremely difficult and extremely tough. But from an African continental perspective, and one has to look obviously beyond the noise of the short term, you've got to look beyond the issues of immediate disruption. If the world is to be successful 100 years from now, it requires investment in Africa, and it obviously requires a stable Africa to fulfill the promise and the return on that investment. This is a continent that is growing in terms of demography, as you all know. I don't need to repeat the statistics of the amount of mouths that there will be on this continent, and mouths because they need to be fed over the next 50, 60 years. From a workforce point of view, this is a continent of young potential workers into the future that is to be seen nowhere else in the world. The dramatic increase in young working age Africans is probably a core feature of this world for the next 50 years, because that working age population is going to dip in China and dip quite substantially. In India, we are still seeing relatively high young worker growth, population growth rates. But this is where the mouths to feed are going to be, and this is where the workers of the world is going to be as well over the next 50, 100 years. So the macro indicators place us at the center, the very center of what should be a successful global environment going forward. And I think that long-term vision is often lacking. It's often lacking when it comes to how the developed world see Africa. And it is also lacking, if I might say, and you've covered a little bit of it in the president's address and in some of your remarks that I heard. It's also lacking, in a sense, in our domestic politics. From a global perspective, foreign countries fail to understand the strategic importance of our continent going forward. And from a domestic perspective on our continent, governments are simply unresponsive to the needs of their people, either due to graft and corruption and patronage and cronyism, as you've mentioned, or due to the need for short-termism in terms of getting into power and getting their friends and cronies into power as well. So on both spheres, from a global sphere and a domestic sphere, we as a people on this continent tend to get squeezed. And I suppose that's the really frustrating part for me. But the macro needs of the continent are so dramatic and offer so much potential that there should be no question from a theoretical perspective as to finding those specific areas to hone in on in terms of investment possibilities and in terms, obviously, of fulfilling the social development goals that relate to the lives of ordinary Africans. And, you can look at the African story with a glass half empty, and you can look at, mention has been made of the current instability in many parts of the continent, ECOWAS in particular, Central Africa, where we've seen some modicum of improvement in the Rwanda-Congo position, although time will tell on that particular issue. Or you can talk about the real possibilities of this continent 50, 100 years into the future. And I think that's where the focus should be, but not without the battle and the fight against those challenges and obstacles that really prevent a more rapid embrace of Africa as this real investment vehicle that we should have. So from my perspective, it's a mixed picture. It's a mixed picture of global polarization, a battle for resources which are coming to this continent. It's already been. We're in a sort of a scramble for Africa 2.0. And I think one of the big features of this continent for the next 50 years will be a battle for resources. Resource wars are really going to be a feature as a futurist that looks to see where we are going to see points of contention on this continent, whether it's in critical minerals, whether it's in agricultural, arable land, whether it's in securing ports for military or strategic purposes. There is going to be a battle from foreign powers, and a multitude of them, for these critical resources that this continent has. And if we're not careful, those battles can potentially tear us apart as well and undermine African unity that should be cemented as part of the AU and as part of the Continental Free Trade Agreement as well. And I just put that in as a sort of geopolitical risk warning for this continent going forward.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Yeah, I think I'll take my leave of you now. And,
So one of the things that President Motlanthe mentioned was the issue of embracing technology and innovation. We've heard people say it's important for us to be at the frontier of innovation, leapfrogging development, and so on and so forth. So Thongwane, I wanted to ask you, in the realm that you're in of space, just give us a little bit of background around the work that you do, but really the fundamental question I want you to answer is, how can space technology help in dealing with some of the challenges on the African continent, and how can trust be built among stakeholders, to get co-investment into investing in technologies that can help to change the game on the continent?
Thank you, Nompu. Following Daniel, it's a little bit challenging. Thank you so much for this platform. Greetings, everyone, and all protocols observed in terms of our dignitaries as well as our business leaders. Thongwane Namane, I'm currently the commercial director for the SCS Aerospace Group, and SCS means Space Commercial Services. We're an engineering company whose core business is satellite engineering, and that means building, designing, launching, as well as operating satellites in South Africa. So this comes off a history of plus minus 30 years. South Africa actually has had a space program since 1958. This was signed together with the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and we are in this space. And just to clear that up, if anybody has any confusion, I am talking about out of this world space. I get sometimes asked the question, commercial space. Oh, so you're in real estate? No. Right. We're also currently developing a commercial business case, in fact, for space resources, colloquially known as space mining. And this ties very nicely together about, an economic imperative when it comes to technology. And we're partnered with SES Space in terms of that. I am extraordinarily pleased that space technology, science, and innovation is on the agenda when we're speaking about Africa and building trust in Africa or development needs in Africa. For a very long time, the continent sat with a type of very limited framework, stigmatized to a certain a degree, being developing, being a third world country, and a lot of information wasn't then disseminated about some of the excellent technology, innovation, scientists, doctors, business people that we have coming out of the continent. One of those examples, as I stated, is that we're currently developing a satellite constellation. It's in the Earth observation space, which is one of the space verticals. How to best describe it would then to talk about the global positioning system, the GPS, where you can tell where anything is in the world. We've called this FLITSAR Earth Observation Constellation a GVS. It's a global visioning system. You can see where anything is in the world. And how we put it out into the market is we speak about infrastructure. So we say we're developing infrastructure. This infrastructure just happens to be in space. So this is a class of small class satellites. Small class satellites are under a ton. It's not CubeSat, which are looking at about 20 kgs. And this has to deal with power systems and your capability of viewing. So the maritime domain, we currently are in discussions with the South African National Space Agency about dealing with the Navy and how we monitor our special economic zone that stretches out into the sea and South Africa's economic coastal region. The other applications is around critical infrastructure monitoring. On the public sector side, the business case lies with how you can then utilize satellite imagery to be able to do spatial planning, image in terms of what your country then looks like in terms of and monitor development. In fact, the type of resolution that we're talking about right now, and this is from space, low Earth orbit, 400 kilometers, these satellites can see up to 0.5 centimeters from the ground. So we utilize synthetic aperture radar technology, and how this differs from cameras and optical is that with cameras you would usually need to have day, you'd need to have light, like a normal camera. However, with synthetic aperture radar, it utilizes radar technology, which is able to see day and night through clouds, through rain, in any conditions. And this was actually developed in South Africa. In South Africa, all the way in collaboration with a British organization, ground penetrating radar. Synthetic aperture radar is able to go into the ground up to 1 meter and actually scan the topological profile. And because we have that technology, we can do it from space. So, the last application, which is absolutely critical when we speak about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and time with the economy, is for agriculture. So the capabilities as well are to manage agricultural crop yields. You're able to monitor soil health as well as moisture. You're able to monitor crop health. You can see if it's diseased or not. This actually shows up on particular RGB technology, which then tells you what healthy chlorophyll looks like in a maize crop and what pest and disease looks like in a maize crop. And with Africa being the breadbasket of the world, this is absolutely critical for us to then be able to develop and enhance our agricultural yields for food security. I think just in terms of speaking from the investment space, I took a really non-traditional pathway into space. And yes, I mean, it's STEM focused, it's a very hard science. However, my background is mainly in financial services. I spent about 15 plus years in the retail and investment space, all the way to institutional investments. But what I do right now is I actually build structures for things that don't exist in the clouds, in the sky. So and why I think it's so important that we have futurists here is because any room that you walk into and you start having discussions about critical investments, about sovereign data, about infrastructure that, like when I talk about sovereign data, I'm saying that there are currently constellations that have access to our data. And South Africa is developing the capability to ensure that we have our own infrastructure and sovereign capability. Is that the time to speak about Africa in terms of its challenges? There's a time where it's nearly nearing to a close. Because the cap in hand type of environment, this is what we are challenged with, is important to note. What's more important is that you come from Africa and you talk solutions. You talk innovation. You talk investments. And that sets you, the world, apart in terms of really changing perceptions about our continent.
Yeah.
1.3 billion people on our continent.
Very quickly, I want you to speak to the application of the applications that you've spoken about. How soon are we going to see the wide use of them, and what does it cost to use them to be able to to utilize them and make an impact in terms of economic growth?
There are currently systems that are available. These systems have been built, though, traditionally by European prime contractors, so European governments, as well as the US as well. So what we're developing currently is our own capability. The FLISA constellation has spun off from the African Resource Management constellation. A constellation is a group of satellites that work together. And currently, we are at the point where the payload development is in play with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and we are looking at launch July 2027. So these applications are coming online, they're coming on board. This is downstream. And maybe I can make a perfect example in terms of construction. You'll have a company that will be able to sit in Egypt and be able to monitor a construction project with a revisit rate of every single day and see what's going on, analyze that data from space. In terms of how this affects our economy, we look at policy development with some of the informal settlements. We look at the capability with our commercial farmers. We look at the capability in terms of defense and national security. We look at protecting our blue economy in terms of our special economic zones. So the deployment that we do and a lot of the market development that we do, together with the National Earth Observation Space Secretariat, is to institute the wider use of satellite data and satellite imagery to be able to enhance our capability.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So on to you, Andrew. Thank you very much, Mr. Central Bank Governor. So African countries are looking to strengthen the protection of consumers through digital lending regulations. How can policymakers balance innovation with the need to build public trust in financial services?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for inviting me, Anthony, and your team. It's a pleasure to be here. Mr. President, an honor to have sat and listened to you this morning, and our distinguished guests. Thank you for the warm welcome. After those two presentations, I have a heavy task, but I'm coming, fortunately, from a different perspective. Point of clarification, I chair the board of the Central Bank of Kenya. We do have a governor. As a chairman of the board, we're in charge of overall governance and oversight on the governor's operations, and he's the CEO of the organization. To your question, fortunately, by day, I'm a practicing lawyer. I get to see regulation in many different forms every day. And from my perspective, the whole concept of regulation has to be looked at as not an obstacle. It's got to be a facilitative tool to encourage innovation. And in today's day and age, when we think of the digital space, the first thing I think of is what Thongwane was talking about. You break all borders. Once you're in the digital space, Facebook doesn't know where Kenya is, where South Africa is, where Vietnam is, or where Hong Kong is. You create a whole ecosystem that allows us to turbocharge growth. And the first thing I think of is really what can be achieved. Innovation is always ahead of the regulator. That's just a fact globally. And Kenya is no exception. We've had great innovations in the digital financial space. And what do they all seek to achieve? Financial inclusion. You seek to break down borders and you seek to lubricate movement of capital. You've got to turbocharge it. And when we think of our continent, the one thing that struck me from the president's address was the opportunity to leapfrog. Technology offers us just that. And the regulator can never be the hindrance to innovation. So when we look at our space, let me give a live example. In Kenya, we birthed something called M-Pesa. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. Digital money. Now, this requires a story to be told because the original conceptualization was to facilitate farmers buying fertilizer in one local district in Kenya, which was funded by an international organization. And all they wanted to do was to say, how do we control the ability of the farmer to receive money, channel it to the right products in terms of agricultural inputs, and thereafter, when they get paid, they similarly are able to pay back the lending that had happened. Now, along the way, when it picked up in this little district, what happened was they realized this is seamless movement of money. What have we done? We've removed friction. Then Safaricom came to the regulator and said, look, we've done this as an experimental project. Would you give us permission to launch it as a broad-based financial service to promote rural financial inclusion to the underserved population? That poor population of Africa is replicated across the continent. What do they need? They'll never go to the big banks because they feel excluded. Chances are there's not even a branch next to you in your village. So what became an experimental financial product to just serve farmers, today, this is your bank in Kenya. And that includes my grandmother in the village, that includes farmers, that includes shopkeepers, that includes everybody. I'll pay my utilities from the comfort of my office. That little project, statistically today, is the biggest bank in Kenya. $438 billion are moved every year. 180 million transactions every day. 5 million businesses. 60 million customers. Now, if you think about that, what it has done digitally, without brick and mortar, is to turbocharge financial inclusion of the underserved population. They borrow money on their phones. You can take a day loan, you can take a monthly loan, you can take a yearly loan, all from the comfort of your phone without having to fill forms and talk to branch managers and explain where your grandmother's ID is and how you will pay. If you don't pay, it's all managed straight off your device. Your identity is managed from there. What have we done? What we've done is bring into the financial mainstream a very wide section of the population that was excluded. This has enabled businesses take off. It has enabled money circulate in the economy. It is now in 12 countries and growing. In fact, they have a big office right here in Johannesburg with Vodafone, based in Johannesburg, born out of a little place called Nyeri in Kenya. As a regulator, we could have taken two approaches. One would have been, oh no, this will disrupt finances, there's too much risk of money laundering. If you look for reasons to say no as a regulator, you will find them. You can also get caught up in the paralysis of analysis. You want to have 10 committees to analyze why something shouldn't happen, can't happen, won't happen. And yet, we had a minister for finance who said, actually, this has the potential to be a good thing. Let's have a little regulatory sandbox. Let's try it out. It grew legs. It exploded. It's continental. Is it a bad thing? It's a wonderful thing. That's one of the biggest taxpayers on the continent, not just in Kenya. So when we tell this story, we tell the story as a regulator to say, we will be very happy to sandbox ideas and nurture them to growth. To answer your question, we are there to enable and not to stifle. We are there to turbocharge, lubricate, and not to strangle innovation on the continent. And the innovation, as we talk about this continent, a lot of people have talked about our mineral resources, and I know in a South African context, it's a huge conversation. In Kenya, we literally don't have mineral wealth to speak of. So what is our wealth? The real wealth in Africa is our people. These ideas will be born here, they must be grown here, they must be nurtured here, and we must not operate on the thesis that our very existence is dependent on flying to Western capitals, cap in hand, looking for somebody else to put food on your table. We can do it for ourselves within this continent. Thank you.
Excellent contributions from all of you. Thank you so much for that, Andrew. Daniel, I don't want to sort of go over old ground, but this question here is, how can African nations balance political stability, economic growth, and transparency to earn long-term investor confidence both locally and globally? And what role does youth engagement and participation play in shaping a trustworthy future for the African continent?
Well, I think I think we're all here because this ground has never quite been smoothed over completely, and the same issues do crop up time and time again. Just to go back, and I think it's related to what you said, I mean, the issue of innovation coming out of this continent, with a young population in particular, who are likely to be a lot more innovative in the long term than, let us say, an aging demographic in Europe or in in Japan or in the United States for that matter, that is our absolute asset. But I would also, and I think it's related to both of the point you made and the point you're bringing up here, the point to me is that those who have innovative ideas, yes, massaging regulation to make those ideas come to fruition is critical. But there's a deeper issue to me, and as part of our malaise on this continent, is that for many, there is a feeling of exclusion. And a feeling of exclusion can be based upon a class, financial access to capital, which is a big issue of exclusion, certainly for us in South Africa, and our agribusiness interests in emerging black farmers really feels it here in this country. But you can be excluded, as I've said, because of the ethnic group that you belong to, because of your lack of political connections and patronage possibilities that may be a stumbling block to taking an idea forward, to political elites who are gatekeepers in society as well. And I think when it comes to your question, those issues haven't been resolved in many instances across the continent. And it is, I think, a stumbling block for taking the initiative and innovation and opportunity that our youth have and propelling them to be able to explore those ideas. So that would be, it's sort of a deeper societal malaise. It's not just an African issue. I don't want to say I'm singling out our continent for this. The same issues of patronage and connection to elites and connections can be found across Latin America, Central America, developing Asia. It's not just an African issue, but it's certainly prevalent on our continent as it is elsewhere. And that would be the first answer just to your question. It's this deep issue of accessing opportunity and not having those societal or political challenges or obstacles put in the way of young people. The issue is clearly to me, and I couldn't agree more, and I think we will all agree that people are the asset of this continent. I travel around the continent. I mean, it doesn't matter where I go. The enthusiasm. There's such a contradiction to me very often in Africa. There's often a, if I might say, and I'm sorry to say this with our former president here, but Mr. President, I suppose for your whole life, you're going to be Mr. President now. You can't go anywhere without calling you Mr. President. But there is often sort of a malaise about political leadership. And I've looked at the figures and surveys done about confidence in leadership. And again, it's not just an African issue, but it's certainly prevalent on our continent. There is a skepticism for leadership. There's a skepticism for leadership that overstays their welcome. And we know on this continent we have many aging presidents who seem to go on and on and on. And we have a skepticism for leadership in general for being unresponsive to the needs of people. And I think that's an issue that's a political issue, and that will change over time. But we've been talking about that issue time and time again. And again, it holds back initiative. It creates frustration. And, I don't want to discuss Kenya's domestic politics here because we've got our own issues in South Africa. But Kenya, just in the last week, has had this issue again on the streets across that wonderful country. And I do go to Kenya quite often. So these are issues I think that we really have to overcome because, yes, you're going to have the ability of Africans to innovate and to go the next level rapidly and quickly is an absolute asset. And your aerospace story, absolutely. The financial inclusion story and the M-Pesa, absolutely. We've got great stories of innovation in this country as well. But if the political obstacles are there, those young people are going to look elsewhere. They're going to look elsewhere to do the deals. They're going to sell that technology outside of our continent. And we are not going to be able to have that proprietary control that we really should have. So, again, it's the operating environment. And there are so many strands to this operating environment. And if I had more hair on my head, you'd see me pulling out the remaining strands of hair in frustration very often on a month-by-month basis when I see often how political leadership do act. So I think we can take some lessons in South Africa from your comments about the regulatory story. I'm going to Europe next week, and I'm giving a talk on regulation in Europe. And I tell you, again, the myriad of regulations in the European Union stymie and stifle innovation there as well. So I'm not singling out this continent, it applies elsewhere as well.
Yeah. President Motlanthe, I think Daniel has hit a few hot button issues, and I think it would be remiss of me not to ask you to make a couple of comments. I know that you have been utilized to teach, political leadership and stuff like that, and you know what the context is that we're in currently, and you know that there is this stasis that's taking place partly because of a lack of political leadership. So I just thought it would be good to get your soundings on some of the issues that have been raised.
Well, I'm really heartened and inspired by the understanding that has been shared with us that innovation will always be ahead of regulation, and that regulation should never be a stumbling block or utilized to arrest innovation. Innovation must be allowed to thrive, because innovation is the story of tools, actually. It's the story of tools in simple terms. And so tools or technology is meant to make life easier for human beings, because tools are an extension of human bodies. So if we do away with all the constraints and obstacles through innovation and modern technology, human beings will enjoy more leisure time, which means they will have life. Because if you think of a working person who has to wake up very early in the morning and spend 2 hours to get to a place of work, and later in the evening spend 2 hours to get, or 3 hours to get home because of traffic jam and so on. And the only time they have to live is when they are asleep. And that's not living. You see? So innovation is actually meant to increase leisure time for human beings. Because with more leisure time, you can try your hand in this and that and this and succeed. But if you have no time to live, all you have is sleep, work, then that's not life. What I'm saying is innovation is actually meant to enhance the quality of life of human beings, and enhance the capacity to produce the means to support life and cover everybody. Because part of the difficulty we have now is that you have a concentration of resources in fewer hands, with more people completely marginalized and left out of the economy of our countries.
Yeah. And President, very quickly, your comment on political leadership.
Yeah. Well, political leadership, like all other forms of leadership, must be based on ethics, integrity, and the understanding that you are at the service of the people, and that the law of motion, this thing about people overstaying their welcome in office and so on, The law of motion, which applies with equal force in nature as well as in society, says that before you ascended to office, there were others who came before you. And there will be others who will come after you. And so the idea that you can make your term a permanent feature is completely, flawed and informed by a misunderstanding of how the law of motion works. Everything, nature, or I was telling Otiro during the tea break that when I was in Form 2, studying physics, our textbook and our teacher was teaching us that the atom is indestructible. And this was 1965, 20 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki had happened. We were still using a textbook which says the atom is indestructible. And yet it had been split in 1945 already. You see. So,
It's a devastating event.
so basically what I'm saying is that political leadership must always be informed by the understanding that you are at the service of the people. It's a privilege that is rendered to you by the people. It's not your gift to the people. No.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, President, for that. So let's come back to you now, Thongwane. Talking about the work of SCS, how is it that you guys go about building trust with your partners? Because no doubt you have a lot of external partners in the work that you do. And how can the lessons that are drawn from your experience be translated to other spheres of the economy?
Thank you, Nompu. That's actually one of my favorite topics. We firstly are proudly South African. We aren't just proudly South African, we're intensely patriotic. You can almost call us economic activists. We want to ensure that when we talk about coming out of South Africa, this is the space industry. This is where we want to keep our projects. We want to benefit South Africa economically. We want to create jobs for South Africans, both indirect and direct jobs. And we have an acute understanding that the workforce development that's required of us is absolutely critical at the moment, particularly, for example, when you're going to speak about space resources and space mining. This is literally the capability that South Africa has hundreds of years of experience in. And we need to just take that skill and expertise and just export it to a different environment. So that doesn't exist at the moment. If you're going to look for a lunar trajectory specialist, for example, that just simply means someone who's a pilot who knows how to travel in aerospace. There is also mission specialists who know how to get to the moon, to the lunar environment. And how we then develop trust is working on our strengths, and our strengths in a fully collaborative type of environment. So we have our South African National Space Agency that was founded in 2010. We then have various governmental departments as well that utilize our data. We also have various individuals that are part of the team or part of the wider space environment who are also have the skills and expertise. In fact, I think the most perfect example to make right now is that of the last 19th Space Exploration Corporation, SpaceX, together with NASA's mission, about 20% of the components were provided by South African companies. 116 products ranging from attitude control as well as vector direction, from cameras. Cameras came out of a sun space program done with the University of Stellenbosch. So we, as South Africans, have a culture of not being very loud. We have a
Maybe
sense
loud on
of
the wrong things.
well, I think it was Mayor Naledi Pandor when she was speaking at the South African Space Science Forum, who said, you know, the moment you start talking about particular things and patting yourself at the back, they say, hey, why cancer? You know, you're like super proud of yourself. But this is what we need to do. This is what we need to have. That's in terms of pride. So let's talk about the numbers. There are three structures that we currently employ, and that's because I come from the commercial environment. This one particular constellation, we are raising capital with partners for 540 million US, which translates to about 8 billion rand, 8 to 9 billion rand. And the structure that we've put in place is on the one aspect, looking at the current Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium, the inaugural one that was initiated by the presidency in 2020. We then set as a digital infrastructure project together with the space agency. The challenge there, though, is that this process needs to go through a very particular methodology to get to bankability. So you need to have your pre-feasibility study, which we've completed, your bankable feasibility study, which we've also completed, until you are eventually able to be bankable. So that is then financed by development finance institutions such as the Industrial Development Corporation, as well as the Development Bank of South Africa. That is a little bit too slow, though. It is a little bit too slow. The amounts that we're talking about are fully capable when we talk about other jurisdictions, who then say to us, just start. Take it the private sector route. It's a commercial business. You have the capability, you have the skill, you have the expertise, you've got the capacity. And I will mention that a very, very important point that Daniel made is that we have offers coming in from the Middle East. We have offers coming in from Europe. We have offers coming in from the US. And it should be an exciting time. But the battle that we're fighting is to keep the South African. That's the battle that we're fighting. So the large aspect is then to look at blended finance models, specifically around impact investing. Impact investing is doing good, aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 1 to 17, which looks at things like equality, looks at infrastructure and innovation. SDG 8 is around decent economy and growth. And how do you have investors who then come in with catalytic capital to say that we're doing good, aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals? And I'd like to bring in as well the African Union's Agenda 2063, which is the blueprint and master plan for development in Africa, and also then ensuring that there is an underlying financial benefit. So those blended finance type of structures, we then take our commercial aspect and we align it with development economics. We align it with how it would be sustainable from a public economics perspective. And that then leads to an absolutely critical question, which is a structure that we've put together around private-public partnerships. So we were quite fortunate to be brought on as a senior advisor for Denel Aerospace Systems with development that is happening around the satellite building project there. Very excitedly was launched with quite huge fanfare was the South African Space Command. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have a military arm in South Africa that has been development. You had airmen, you've got terrestrial men, you have seamen, and now you've got spacemen, who are headed up by General Matebula. So we're very excited about coming in and saying that we are a private sector company. We will bring the private sector expertise to adhere and to look at public sector outcomes that look at developing the economy. However, our largest challenge that we've had, to be completely honest, is around pace. The pace of the interactions that we get, particularly with government, almost to a point, as we say, we're in the Middle East. They will say very quickly, "Here you are, um, develop and give us this capability, give us this technology, give us your proprietary information. We will give you the capital. Just make sure that it's spent in Saudi."
Yeah. It sounds like what Andrew was saying about, I'm going to fluff paralysis analysis, that you end up just not getting anything done because of those sorts of things. Andrew, I have a separate question for you, but given that you are in this space, I wanted to get your sense of whether you think blended financing is the way forward right across the continent in terms of development, be it whatever type of infrastructure. Is that the only sustainable way rather than one investor putting all their skin in the game? But the question that I have for you is really, in markets where transparency is quite a challenge, what is it that financial institutions can do better to ensure that they build trust with their consumers?
Yeah, I think that whole conversation really, for Africa, is about breaking down the silos. We are operating in silos. I mean, some of the stories Thongwane is referring to, I keep looking at it. In one of the hats I wear, I chair the board of a pension fund management company. And we've gotten to a point in Kenya where, with about $8 billion of assets under management, we are now beginning to struggle. We're beginning to struggle for opportunity. There's capital, but the capital needs a home. And then when I listen to these conversations, it makes me wonder, because this is a conversation in this room in Johannesburg, but I'm wondering, how does this information get out of this silo and become available across the continent? And if you look at blended finance, you look at PPPs, there are so many instruments available and opportunities. And what do we need to do? Break the walls. Because what's happening is you could be sitting in this room with an issue that can be solved by the person in the next room, but all doors are so solidly locked that we have no access to each other's information. So, thank you. Among the things we have to look at is interoperability of our continent. I would love to get to a situation where somebody in Niger becomes aware of the opportunity in Johannesburg. And in a regulatory perspective, we make it easily available without hindering them having access to each other. Because part of growing a business, every idea starts with, what problem are we trying to solve? If you're solving a problem, you have a business. If you're not solving a problem, people will move on. Right? So when I think about the conversations we're having as a regulator, you need fair and consistent trade practices, consistent, transparent regulation across the continent. You need to allow for good, strong data privacy structures, and we need to have institutional strength in all our countries. Somebody wants to know that if I'm in the legal environment in Tanzania, am I protected? Are my contracts worth more than the paper that they're written on? And am I going to be allowed to move my people and capital across the continent? We have multiple countries across Africa. And I was sharing in Thongwane actually just before we started the session that between Kenya and South Africa, for example, we removed the obstacle of visas to travel. There was one flight a day from Nairobi to Johannesburg and back. Today, there are 3 into Johannesburg every day, and there are 2 into Cape Town every day. What does that mean? People and capital are moving up and down without friction. Very simple solution. Probably, Mr. President, the 2 presidents sat and talked and said, why are we stifling growth amongst our people? And agreed. And this is where leadership comes in. The role that political leaders can play in smoothing out some of these bumps and roadblocks that stifle the movement of capital and people. And there you have it. Voila, with one stroke of a pen, I pick up my passport. I was invited to speak at the ASI Summit. I just got onto the plane like I was going to my village. And I was here in 4 hours. Yeah. Ordinarily, that would have been fill 12 pages of forms, give my passport away. The passport stays with the embassy for 3 months. Who can do business like that? And this is just Africa. Juxtapose that to Europe. And we were talking about your arrival at a European airport or an American airport, God forbid today, and you know the story. Everybody looks at you like you are emigrating to their country. And when you tell them, I'm here for business, I'm here as a tourist, and I'm going back in 2 weeks, the next thing you ask for, inevitably, is do you have your return ticket with you? Am I right or wrong? That's just the truth. And that attitude is a mind shift because we just said, oh, impose visas because visas are imposed everywhere. No. This is Africa. We have to break the silos and look at ourselves as one country. And I'll never forget a trip to Israel, I think around 2018. And I was going to Israel to buy a software company. And we're involved in a healthcare technology business, which our parent company at the time was Israeli. They were actually our partners. But what happened is the Kenyan unit redeveloped and reconfigured the software to a point where it was unrecognizable by the parent. So we realized, why are we paying royalties to somebody in Israel when we've revolutionized the technology and taken it to the next level? So strategically, our thinking was, before we grow too big, let's buy out the parent, give them a check, and say goodbye. And today we're in 12 countries across the globe, not paying anybody royalties. But here's the joke. At immigration in Israel, same question. What are you doing in Israel? This time I wasn't on holiday. And I said, I'm here to buy a software company. And he had a double take. Closed the passport, looked at it, opened it, turned it, and said, you're what? But I was really proud of that answer because the traffic is usually the other way around, where they're coming onto our continent to make all manner of investments, and we're going out there to ask for aid and support and what have you. So I said, yes, we're here to buy a software company. I gave him the details. I don't mind saying it's not secret, OTI Global. We were just buying one division of the business, but I said we're here to buy the company. With a lot of pride as an African. Why do I share this? I share this for Africa to develop self-belief. Let's believe in what we're capable of. Thank you.